My name is Scott Bloyer, and I am so glad that you've decided to join with us for episode 3 of You Can Learn Something from Anyone. I'm sitting in Mile Highland A-Town studio on the 3rd floor of Elevation Christian Church, and today our interview is going to be with Caleb Kaltenbach. Caleb Kaltenbach is a pastor and a founder of the Messy Grace Group, where he helps churches love and foster community with the LGBTQ community without sacrificing theological convictions. He's currently writing Messy Truth and has also authored 2 other books called God of Tomorrow and Messy Grace. This is where he discusses being raised in the LGBTQ community, following Jesus, and how loving others doesn't require shifting beliefs. Caleb is a graduate of Ozark Christian College, Talbot School of Theology, that's Biola University. He received his doctorate from Dallas Theological Seminary, and in addition to serving as lead pastor and associate pastor, Caleb has served on the boards of ministries and colleges. He and his family live in Southern California, and Amy is a registered associate marriage family therapist. Besides speaking, writing, and consulting, Caleb has been the guest with or featured in the New York Times, Fox and Friends, the Beck Show, the Eric Metaxas Show, Christianity Today, Focus on the Family, Family Life Today, the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast, Church Leaders Podcast, the 700 Club, unSeminary Podcast, Moody radio shows, Q Podcast, Dallas Seminary Table Podcast, and so many more. We are so fortunate to be able to sit down and have a conversation with him about what does it look like to be a parent of a child that comes to you and says that they're dealing with an alternative lifestyle choice, or what does it look like to be in a community of faith and to walk through that. I believe Caleb gives us some great insight, some great opportunities to grow in faith and to understand how we can love people no matter where they're at. So please take the next few minutes just to enjoy this conversation that we have with Caleb Kaltenbach. Well, I'd like to welcome you all to this opportunity to speak with Caleb Kaltenbach. Caleb, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. I am so excited. See, we wanted to show the world that God does bring people together in amazing ways, because Caleb is a Chiefs fan and I'm a Broncos fan. So God's got to be at work for us to be able to just sit down and talk.
Absolutely. I'm also a Cobra Kai fan, so I don't know how you feel about that, but
well, I love it. I love it. My son and I watch How I Met Your Mother, and they're always talking about the real Karate Kid is actually the guy from Cobra Kai. So I'm with you on that one. That's good.
There you go.
Well, I wanted to be able to take some time for the people that I know that will be a part of this. You've written 2 amazing books. You do some amazing things with your with Messy Grace, and so. My hope would be that we could just start out with you kind of sharing your life story so that people could know more about you, especially as they go to read your books.
Man, absolutely. Thanks for giving me that opportunity. And again, it's great to be here with you. I'm originally from Columbia, Missouri, and Kansas City. My parents were married. They both were professors at the University of Missouri, Columbia. They got divorced when I was 2. They both went into same-sex relationships. My dad never had a monogamous partner. He had several different partners and people in his life. But my mom went into a 22-year relationship with a psychologist named Vera. They moved to Kansas City, Missouri, which is why I'm a Chiefs fan. Yeah. And they were together for 22 years until Vera died from cancer. And that was in 2005 when she died. But I was raised my whole childhood in the LGBTQ community. My mother and her partner took me with them to bars and clubs and pride parades, campouts, house parties. And I remember, especially at the pride parades, you would see the ugliness of some Christians holding up signs saying God hates you, spraying urine on people. And I thought to myself, I never want to be a Christian.
Right.
I also saw Christian families ignoring their young sons in the 1980s who were dying from AIDS.
Right.
They thought that that was their moral duty to God somehow, to be a jerk. And I thought to myself, I never want to be a Christian, because if Christians are this bad, I can't imagine how awful Jesus Christ is.
Wow.
That was my thinking.
Wow, yeah.
And I joined a Bible study to learn how to disprove the Bible. And I ended up becoming a Christian at the age of 16, because I found out that Jesus was not like the people on the street corners, or maybe today we would say he is not like the people on social media,
Yeah.
some people.
No doubt. Yeah.
And in Jesus, I just saw this beautiful nuance, if I can use that word, or tension between grace and truth. And he came full of both. And he was gracious when people expected him to be truthful, and he was truthful when people expected him to be gracious. And then I got baptized and wanted to be a pastor. And I had to come out to my 3 gay parents at the age of 16 as a Christian. And their response was to kick me out.
Wow.
And eventually they let me back in. I went to Bible college.
So when they kicked you out, what did you do? I mean, where did you go?
I had been going to a buddy's church in Columbia, Missouri, a church called Forum Christian Church,
Uh-huh.
and his dad was the preacher. So I'd been going there on Sunday nights to their youth ministry, their student ministry, and I had made a lot of friends. And so I just stayed with some different friends during that time. One of them was a guy named Roy Weiss. His dad is John Weiss at Southland Christian Church. Stayed with them for a while, stayed with my youth minister, Joey, stayed with some other people. Eventually, God let me back in.
Wow. Now, you said you went on to school to be in ministry. You became a pastor. Explain to me how, when you became a pastor and you would work in a church community, how would they react to the situation of your family?
Yeah, well, I went to school in southern Missouri, a place called Ozark Christian College.
Yeah.
That was for my undergrad. And while I was there, preached at several different country churches. I preached at this one church for about 18 months. There were 50 people in the town, in this town of Missouri. It was about an hour north of the school. 50 people in the town. 25 of them were in our church. I think we were the largest church per capita in the world.
That's awesome.
At that time. And so after 18 months of preaching there on the weekends, I finally got my mom to come to church with me. And the next Sunday, there were 2 elders on the doorstep saying, if you want to keep preaching here, don't you ever bring somebody like your mother again.
Wow.
And so that was obviously my last day there.
Right.
And I walked out of there, and I ended up going to be an associate pastor for 11 years at a church called Shepherd Church, which I think is a sister church of your church, Shepherd Church, or Shepherd of the Hills Church in the Los Angeles area. A guy named Dudley Rutherford is the senior pastor there. And so I served there for 11 years. And, honestly, people were, it's Los Angeles, California. Everybody's crazy. Right. So, there's still very much of a conservative Bible belt in Southern California. A lot of people don't realize that,
right,
that there is. But at the same time, people didn't judge me based on my parents' previous decisions. And if anything, they expressed concern for my parents. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, because you never know, unfortunately, nowadays, where people are going to fall on that side of the conversation. Like you said, Jesus is both truth and grace, and some people don't know how to blend the two, and so it's very difficult in those situations. So now you graduate college, you've been in ministry, you're married, and you've got 2 children. What is life like now for you, and when it comes to your relationship with your parents?
Life is great. I've been a senior pastor at 2 different churches: church in Dallas, Texas, and church in Simi Valley, California. My wife used to be a teacher, and now she's a associate marriage and family therapist. I've got a boy in the 7th grade, a daughter in the 5th grade. He thinks he's the master of the universe. She is going on 19, and she's
right
in the 5th grade. So there's that whole reality, which is a whole separate podcast episode. But when I was in Texas preaching, my parents eventually moved down there to be closer to our family. My mom and dad separately of one another, and my mother's partner, as I said before, had died from cancer.
Right.
They started attending my church, even though they knew what I believed, that God designed sexual intimacy to be expressed in marriage between a man and a woman. And yet they kept on attending. People were kind to them, and eventually my mom and dad gave their lives to Jesus Christ and decided to follow him. I started a ministry back in August 2017 called the Messy Grace Group. And basically what I do is I come alongside churches and Christian organizations and help them to create belonging for LGBTQ people without sacrificing their theological convictions or values. So, how do you create systems and policies that allow people to attend and give them the margin to hear the gospel, to hear about Jesus, to have God do spiritual heart surgery in their lives? How do you do that without compromising your doctrine, your values, so on and so forth? And I didn't know how it would go, but it's taken off.
That's
So,
awesome. That's awesome. I think what speaks to that is how many churches now are going, okay, how do we have this conversation instead of doing what you experienced as a child of going, well, we've pushed this group of people so far away. Now we've got to figure out what do we do? Because you read different books, and everybody thinks that the Christian is the Republican, homophobic individual that is just about money and right wing government. And so it's like, well, how do you do that? And I think that's just speaks volumes that there are more communities of faith looking to make a more grace-filled conversation than just a judgment. So
if I can add something to that real quick, if that's okay, I think
please.
that this whole quarantine season, Wade, I think that it's really given us an opportunity, a chance to have people attend our services, to attend and hear worship and hear communication and preaching without walking into the building. And so there are a lot of churches that probably have more LGBTQ individuals who are attending their church online than they ever did before this season. And so now the question becomes,
What do we do next?
how do you engage that after that? So that's just something I've been thinking lately about this, because I think there really has been a season in which, not just LGBTQ people, but unchurched people in general.
Right.
Right. So anyway, that's just the thought I've been having lately.
No, I agree. And so with that in mind, what do you tell a Christian student leader, or I shouldn't say Christian, but a student leader in a church? What do you tell them? What do you say? Okay, now that students are coming back and there's this possibility of this influx of new individuals that have this this belief, what do you do? What do you encourage them to do?
First of all, I encourage churches to create an atmosphere in the way they treat people. Things that they say from the stage during worship, not lightening the language, but being intentional with it, that kind of thing. Try to build an environment that anyone can attend. Like, anyone should be able to attend church, period, right? Doesn't matter who you are. Maybe not Raiders fans.
Yeah.
Other than that,
they're still searching for Jesus. We know that.
yeah, they're still searching. They shouldn't be let in until they give that up. But everybody else should be able to attend church. And so you got to create a welcoming atmosphere. And sometimes that's training volunteers that just because you see two men holding hands or two women holding hands or something like that in the lobby, and this may seem very, very simple for some listeners or viewers. So if it does seem simple, please forgive me for that. But there are a lot of people who are here and they're asking those kind of questions.
Right.
We got to train volunteers. We got to even, acclimate some of our staff to say, when you see that, that's not something you have to go and correct.
Right.
That's not something you have to fix in that moment. Okay. Exactly. We want them to start attending. We want them to hear about the gospel and grace and truth. And we want them to begin asking questions. And they're going to begin asking questions as they start engaging within the church, whether it's, hey, I'd love to serve in this place or another place. I'd love to join a small group, which I do think that churches should have places where anyone can serve, even if you're an atheist. And then obviously there are places where, there are boundaries. But same thing with small groups. Anybody should be able to join that, because when people start wanting to serve, ask questions, or join a small group, that their level of interest is high, and you have a bit more credibility to have different conversations. But it's always best if they begin asking the questions, and usually that happens.
Yeah, that's one of the languages we use here at Elevation CC is always, you can belong before you believe. Because we do have so many people that have either been burned or just have a negative connotation of what it means to be a part of a community of faith. So we'd rather go, hey, let's earn the right to be heard in this conversation. And then when we go there, and then when it comes to the place, like you said, where they're asking those questions, then we can address them instead of throwing it at them right when they walk through the front doors.
Yeah,
so
I love that. Belong before you believe. And also, I think, one thing that I heard Erwin McManus say at Mosaic Church one time, he said, "You can be with us even if you don't agree with us."
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I've never heard that one.
And that was good.
No, that is good. So you've got, let's just use it for instance. You've got a young man, young woman. Parents are attending. She comes out or he comes out to the parents. Now they're part of the student ministry. They've always kind of been a part of it. What would you suggest to a student leader? What do they do? How do they handle that next step of them being involved? Because let's be honest, sometimes it's more difficult in handling the situation with a student than an adult, just because I think sometimes in a more volatile kind of conversation. Does that make
That
sense?
we're also dealing with a minor.
Yes.
And so I mean, there are two different wavelengths when it comes to this conversation. What do you do with a student who feels that they are, same-sex attracted? Maybe they self-identify in some way as lesbian, gay, bisexual. So that's one. But the other is if somebody says, "I believe that I am transgendered."
Okay.
That presents. Those are two very different conversations. And even though the LGBT are in the same acronym, um, there are vast differences uh, between that. You know what I mean? Does that make sense at
Yeah.
all?
No. Yes, sir. Yeah.
And so like with students, when it comes to the LGB, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and the list, the acronym is just so long right now. But when
Right.
it comes to that, I think first of all, the best way that student ministry pastors can help those students is to invest as much as they can in their small group leaders. I think that's the first step. Investing in the small group leaders, helping them not to overreact because that student may want to share within their small group, and training the small group leader. How do you deal with that?
Yeah.
I mean, if the small group is not on that subject and yet they're taking it there, how do you gently redirect? How do you say,
Right.
you know what, I would love to have that conversation, but we really are discussing this topic. Can you and I maybe talk after group?
Right.
Could you call me on the phone this week and let's chat or something? So I think equipping volunteers and small group leaders to know how to do that. And I think really one of the biggest things is allowing students to ask questions, because you probably have the same experience. There are a lot of students who say that they're same-sex attracted, they know it from birth, and they are. There are a lot of students that get caught up in where you live, in your community, where I live in Los Angeles, where it is very trendy
Right.
to be a sexual minority, for lack of a better phrase. But within middle school, high school culture, is it like that in Colorado?
Yes. Very much so. Yes.
Yeah. And so you see that, especially with students who say that they're bisexual. There are some who are bisexual, but that's usually a straight kid that's trying to fit in. And
Right.
so one of the worst things you can do is to overcorrect. One of the best things you can do is to create an environment where the student feels comfortable enough to ask questions and understands that when they ask questions, they're not going to be penalized or punished, disciplined for asking a question,
Right.
because they are expressing themselves. So many students that I've talked to, one summer at CIY, a student or two will come out to me. They'll say, "I'm gay, I'm lesbian." And then the next summer I see them, they're like, "I'm not gay anymore." And I'm like, "Whoa, it's like a Christmas miracle."
Right.
You know, I
Right.
don't say that, but in my head, I'm thinking, "You never were."
Right.
And thankfully, nobody tried to correct them. They let them ask questions, they dialogued with them, and the student came to that conclusion on their own. And so those are just some of the initial things that I would do. And here's the other thing to keep in mind: that if a student really is same-sex attracted or sees themselves as gay or lesbian, that does not mean that they are automatically going to go into another relationship. That
Right.
does not mean that they're going to pursue that. Unfortunately, we've created within the church an environment, a culture where you're looked at as weird if you never get married. And
Right.
so the reason why most people do not ever pursue celibacy is not because they're afraid of dying from sex. Nobody's ever died from a lack of sex. Plenty of people have died because of sex.
Right.
People fear isolation and loneliness more than they do
Yeah.
a lack of sexual intimacy. And so I think to some degree, we have to give people permission not to get married. And we also have to counter what society teaches and teach people that sexual intimacy and marital intimacy are not the highest forms of intimacy.
Right.
You can experience intimacy in other ways, and the highest form is agape intimacy, that intimacy with God.
Yes. Yeah. It's always the conversation we have is you can love your mate and you can love each other as a couple, but unless you have that Christ-filled love, it's still not the best it can be until you're
Right.
standing with Jesus as the center part of that. So you've got two kids, 7th grader, 5th grader. One of them comes home, has this conversation with you, Dad, I think. What's the best way for Christian parents or just parents in general to be able to go, okay, here's a conversation. What do I do now? Because I'll be honest, if 20 years ago one of my kids would have come home and done that, I don't know if I would have given the best answer. I think I'm a little more educated in the conversation now, but I don't know if I'd have done a good job. What would be something you would encourage parents to walk through when that conversation possibly would happen in their life?
Yeah. Usually, if you're someone involved in your child's life when a child comes out to you, that's not going to be a surprise.
Right.
Sometimes
Right.
it is. I'm not. I'm not going to be insensitive or unempathetic and say that that's always the case. Sometimes it is, and you and it is a surprise. Most of the time, it's not. So, in that moment when that conversation happens, here are some guiding principles I tell parents. You got to control your emotions. Number one,
Yeah.
don't get mad. Don't start crying. Don't imagine the worst. You got to listen. Okay. Another thing is don't make it about you. You know,
Right.
and then also don't be a Sherlock Holmes. Don't try to figure out, well, what made you this way?
Right.
Don't throw Bible verses at them. Don't tell them they need to get counseling. Try to control your facial expressions as much as possible. Again, listen, 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 and reaffirm the relationship. Say things like, thank you so much for telling me this.
Right.
You know what? I love you no matter what. I'm so thankful that you've let me in on this part of your life. And this changes nothing about our relationship. It
Right.
doesn't change the way I feel about you or anything, because honestly, it doesn't,
No.
right? It shouldn't. And if it does, there's something wrong with that parent.
Right.
In that moment, because love is not dependent on your love for your child should not be dependent on what they do. It should be dependent on the fact that they are your child,
Right.
just like God's love for us is that way. And again, it's recognizing that they are still processing this
Right.
as you. And so something that I tell teenagers, a lot of teenagers, even though they know my theological perspective and conviction, they will say, I want to come out to my parents, so how do I do that? And I'll say different things like, well, make sure that you really want to have this conversation, because it will change things in your house for a while.
Right.
And depending on who your parents are, it might change it for a long time. Don't have the conversation at nighttime. Don't get overly emotional.
Don't do it
Maybe
on
in
the
a
phone.
public setting, like a restaurant, like in a booth, people tend not to get overly emotional in that kind of
Yeah.
situation. And don't force your parents into the same closet you came out of. Don't say, well, if you don't accept this part of who I am, you're rejecting all of me, so I'm going to leave.
Mm.
I tell them, how long did it take you to come to this conclusion about who you are? Don't you want to afford your parents that same opportunity and
Right.
that same margin to process this? And you got to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
You have
That's
made
good.
that decision to come out.
That's good. So you're involved with helping churches through the Messy Group to put together processes and everything to handle that. What would you say? Because one of the things that I truly believe is a lot of church leaders are terrified to be able to state a biblical perspective on this, and they're worried about the backlash of what might happen. How do you encourage church leaders to be able to have a biblical, perspective on this, but then also be able to have a loving grace conversation? And if they do have that biblical perspective, like we've talked about, the same that you have, that they get the flashback, how do they handle that?
So first of all, I tell people my personal advice. There are people that disagree with me, and they're it's fine for them to be wrong. I'm just kidding, but there are people that I'm gonna say, but I don't believe churches should put their view on marriage or sexuality on their website, on a pamphlet in their lobby, something like that. That's just my opinion. There are a lot of churches that do that I've worked with, and there are they have presented good reasons why they do that, and I understand. I'm just telling you my initial
Oh, that's
opinion
good. Yeah.
in general, because I think for a lot of people that slams a door shut in their face. And there are a lot of people that may check you out online that will never walk through your doors if they see that, because they're automatically going to make assumptions.
Right. That you're
So
judgmental.
yeah, judgment.
Yeah.
So people say, well, okay, Caleb, when do you say that? Because you don't want to be guilty of a bait and switch. And I appreciate that. I
Right.
appreciate, you know, people don't want to be bait and switched. There's that website out there called churchclarity.com where they, rate churches on how egalitarian they are or how approving they are of same-sex relationships. And I just think that's a horrible website,
Yeah.
because they're trying to force churches into a category. Okay, because there, there's no black or white with this. There's
Right.
there's either or when it comes to, I think, the act of sexual intimacy. But like, for instance, at my last church, there was a couple that started attending, an older couple, older lesbian couple. They wanted to get involved. And they said, what does your church think about homosexuality? And I said, you know what? I would love to have this conversation with you. It was on a Sunday, but I'm in between services and I can't give you the attention that you'd like. Can we meet together? And I want to hear your story and I want to hear what God's doing in your life. And we got together, and this is what I found out, that within, they've been together for 30 years. They lived in the same house. They weren't married. They slept in separate bedrooms, and they hadn't been sexually active in years. And so, but yet they still refer to themselves as lesbians. So
Right. Right.
are they sinning? I
Yeah.
mean, the best argument could be codependency, but in the way that we think about it, they wouldn't. So what if I would have just put that out there on the website? They never would have showed up. They're still serving there now. My
Yeah.
bigger conversation with them was about, why do you call yourself this first when you really, over and above everything else, you're a daughter of the king.
Right.
You're a princess in God's kingdom. And so we can't have all these categories. We got to be careful about them. I think when you have those conversations is, number one, when people start asking, and also when people want to serve in specific areas of leadership that require teaching, that require biblical leadership,
Right.
then you can have those conversations with them. I also think that there is bait and switch to some degree, but there's not as much as what some people may think, because even when people hear you preach about a marriage series, you may not ever include anything in one of your sermons on gay marriage or something like that. But when you talk about marriage, you're going to say things like husband and wife
Yep.
all
Man
the
and
time. You're going to say mom and dad.
woman.
You're going to say those things, and then they see some of the stuff that their kids bring home with them, and it's pretty easy to tell. You know what I mean?
Right.
If where a church stands. And so I think that those conversations are best had in the context of trust and relationship as much as possible. Sometimes that doesn't happen. It doesn't work out that way, but a lot of the times it can. And we have to be intentional. And I don't think that's compromising the truth. I
No.
think that's being intentional and telling them, because I think that just like there's sanctification where God daily makes us more into the image of Christ, I
Right.
think there's such a thing as progressive conviction, where there are some things that God chooses to convict us about later on in our life,
Good.
instead of
That's
right
good.
up front.
Yeah. No, that's good. No, man, I appreciate that. That was because our goal is always to love the person. You hear those old right, hate the sin but love the sinner and all that. But it's so hard when sometimes you're doing that and they see you now as opposition just because you've gone. Well, this is what we see the Bible saying, and that's always hard because you don't want them to take it that way, but they're gonna in some cases. Correct? They're just gonna.
Right. No, there are some people that have come and they've come to fight. There
Yeah.
are some people that once you say something like that, they are going to automatically assume that you are aligned with people that have really wounded them in their life, and there's no distinction between you and those people. But there are a lot of people that won't think that way,
Right.
and also it goes in how we have the conversation. Like when we used to have to, I coach churches, when you have to tell somebody that maybe they can't serve somewhere, like teach or whatever, because of their relationship choice, not their not that they decided to be gay, but their choice to be in a relationship. Usually it's best if you express it, within the context of being concerned for them, saying, hey, at this church, this is what we believe about sex and sexuality. Obviously, this is not your theological conviction. And if you served in this position, you would eventually have to teach something you don't believe.
Right.
We would put you in a position where you had to teach something that you didn't believe.
Oh,
We
man.
would love to put you in a volunteer position where you did not have to compromise your theological integrity or your ethics.
No, that's good. That's good. Putting it in a position where it's of love, not of judgment, or, even
Yeah,
like the bait and switch deception thing. We're helping what's best for you and
right.
your relationship with Christ. No,
Yeah,
that's good.
exactly. And we are concerned about you. We love you. We want you to be here. But you would be compromising your theological convictions if you served in this area, and we'd rather have you not do that. And when I personally have those conversations, from what I've heard of other people in those conversations, when it's expressed like that, it's usually received very well.
Right.
And you're standing up for what's right and for what's true, but you're not doing it at the expense of the person where they feel
Right.
shamed.
Right. It's divine. It's not demeaning.
Right. I
Yeah.
love that.
Oh,
Divine, not
good.
demeaning.
Yeah. So we've got God of Tomorrow, Messy Grace. You're working on
Be true.
Messy Truth. When's that coming out?
That is going to come out 2021. It's supposed to come out this fall, but COVID, as I call it, has just messed everything up. So
Right.
um, it's going to come out sometime next year. The subtitle is, Messy Truth, How to Foster a Community Without Sacrificing Convictions. And then I'm working on some e-courses, and I'm going to be publishing a PDF book on my website soon. And it's called Messy Leadership, and it deals with a lot of stuff that I kind of consult with churches and Christian colleges and organizations. How do you create these systems and policies and so on and so forth without demeaning other people, without pushing them out, but yet you want to hold on to your values?
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. The way we kind of close things out is we call it the minute meltdown. And so it never takes a minute, but it's just asking questions that we want to hear from you that has nothing to do with what we just talked about, because everything we just talked about was so good. And this is just going to be fun. So let's start off right away. What's your favorite candy?
What's my what?
Favorite candy?
Nestle Crunch Bar.
Nestle Crunch. Hey, that was like easy. Okay. Yeah, I think I've seen it in the pictures on Instagram when you're having it at the movie theater. So, all right. Toilet paper, over or under?
Over.
Yeah, because you can't be a leader if you're thinking the other way.
No.
Favorite guilty pleasure movie? If that movie's on TV, it's a movie you're going to sit and watch no matter what.
Blazing Saddles.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Big fan. Sorry. Restaurant that you just can't live without?
Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A. Christian chicken. Right on.
Christian chicken.
And then best book that you've read recently?
On Writing by Stephen King. It's the way how he writes. It's Andy Stanley has Communicating for a Change.
Right.
Stephen King has his book called On Writing, and it's how he develops characters. It's how he writes, because the guy doesn't just write horror. He wrote
Right.
Parts of Atlantis, Shawshank Redemption, Stand By Me. I mean, just Green Mile.
Yeah.
He is one of my favorite authors. So On Writing by Stephen King. If you ever really want to know a unique way to write and have fun reading it, I would read On Writing by Stephen King.
Done deal. Okay. Scariest thing you've ever experienced?
Exorcism in Haiti.
Exorcism in Haiti. Okay. So you were on a mission trip, or how did that function?
I was on a mission trip, saw an exorcism, and really didn't sleep well that night.
I bet. Although I do know that you have scary moments on your Instagram, which as a father of 3, I truly appreciate.
Oh yeah, I love to scare my kids. I've done it the last 2 days even, and
it's beautiful.
yeah, I have to save up points to scare my wife, because she'll go from laughing to all of a sudden being mad. So I have to prepare for that one.
Yeah, I made the mistake of first. It was probably in our first 10 years of marriage. I thought it'd be funny to turn off all the breakers in the house and then run through the house. That was a bad choice. Found her huddled in the hallway on the ground, almost sucking her thumb. And so I'm just glad I'm still married. So last one. Who's your greatest personal inspiration?
Besides Jesus.
Yes, besides Jesus.
There are many. I can say right now. I'll say, how about right now?
I love it.
Dr. Martin Luther King. Just got done reading his book called Strength to Love, and I know that a lot of people have said, "Well, he wasn't perfect, and he did this." It's like, okay, yeah. Well, let's look into your past too while we're at it.
Right.
So here's the thing, though. I think that so much of what he says about forgiveness, loving your enemy, in that book is just so powerful, and I think that we need it today, especially after the video from South Georgia that was released last week. I think we really need to understand that unless we forgive our enemies and those who have hurt us, we will never be able to love our neighbor as ourselves.
Yeah.
Never.
We'll never be truly free. Yeah, I'm with you. All right. So lastly, best ways people can follow you online. I know you've got your website, kaltenbach.com. You've got
messygracegroup.org, and then Instagram, Twitter, Facebook is at Caleb Wilds.
Okay, Wilds.
CWILDS, because that's my middle name.
Oh, wow. That is a unique middle name.
It is. I wish it was my last name.
Dude, I'm with you. That's like a football last name.
Football last name, or really cool preacher, Pastor Wilds.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Wow. Wasn't that amazing? All of the insight that he gives to us on how to walk in love and faith with the LGBTQ community. I am so blessed to be able to have spent that time with Caleb. I hope you have too. Please make sure that you share this podcast, that you give us a review, that you let other people know about it. What we're trying to do is continue to share with people. We can learn something from anyone. If you still want to get to know more about Caleb and the work that he's done, go to the Messy group. Let's see, what's it called again? I want to make sure I get it right. The Messy Grace group. You can find them on the internet and be able to follow up with all that's going on. But also you can find Caleb at calebkaltenbach.com. He's on Instagram with Caleb Wilds and Facebook, Caleb Wilds. I just encourage you to go and find out more. But as we continue on doing different interviews, I just want to ask that you would please go to Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, Google Play, and make sure you share these podcasts as we continue to talk about, hey, what does it mean to learn something from anyone? Have a great rest of the week.